Joining me here in the studio is Haras Rafiq, the Managing Director of the Quilliam Foundation. He's also a former member of the UK Government Task Force looking at countering extremism in response to the 7/7 bombings. Welcome. It's good to have you back with us on Sky News tonight. Now, as we analyse the news that's breaking tonight, it's quite clear this is most probably families with young children, not the kind of teenagers we've talked about.
Sure.
So radicalisation seems to be hitting a wider and wider group.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that's different with ISIL or the Islamic State now compared to Al-Qaeda is that they have declared this Islamic State. And although they're looking for fighters, they're looking for people to come in and become jihadist brides, they're also looking for people to come and live in the land. They're looking for people to come and play their part in terms of doctors, as we've seen recently with the 9 British medical students that have gone over from Sudan. And they're looking for families to go over there. We've seen families going over there in the past, and we're going to see more of it. And I think today's warnings that that you alluded to earlier on, in terms of the numbers that we're going to see growing in terms of youngsters, especially as part of families and individuals as well, is going to be growing. And I think that this is something we're going to see more of.
All of which underlines the fact that the measures we're taking to try and combat radicalisation simply aren't working, are they?
Well, we're not doing a good job. We've only got half a prevent strategy. The last 5 years, the government, society, we've actually crippled ourselves. We're hopping on one leg. This is more chasing these people when they've gone over and they've left Britain. It's actually not part of prevent, it's part of pursue. So we're really not even effectively running a strategy. We don't have a strategy for preventing people from becoming radicalised in the first place. But the other thing is that we also need to look at the way that the Turkish government are behaving as well. Because although they've stopped these people, this is the largest group of Brits that have been stopped trying to cross the border, they're still letting lots of youngsters through. They're still letting a lot of people through, a lot of girls, a lot of boys, and this is something that perhaps we have to weigh up. Is this a political stunt from the Turkish government because they're coming under increasing pressure?
Indeed, a lot of criticism in the recent weeks, particularly with those girls who travelled over the February half-term. Now, in the last hour, we were talking to Nazir Afzal, the senior prosecutor, who was talking about the fact he'd been approached by head teachers saying, we know parents who are scared that their children might just travel to Syria over Easter, but they don't want to report them. I mean, this is a huge problem, isn't it?
It's a huge problem. We're getting calls from approximately on average 5 schools every day, and we're getting calls and emails from parents every day as well, pleading for help and assistance, because on the one hand we have statutory legislation that's in place now that schools, parents, everybody has to do their bit to try and prevent radicalisation. The schools and teachers and parents don't actually know what to do. This goes back to half the strategy. Some parents, on the other hand, also have a role to play in radicalising youngsters as well. As we've known recently, one of the parents of the 3 young girls that went over there from Bethnal Green has actually been found on video footage going to not extremist organisation rallies, but prescribed terrorist organisations rallies, burning American flags, doing various things that really would suggest that he was part of that group in the first place. And there's an atmosphere within how we really need to look at as well. So yes, schools have their role to play, but parents also, and everybody's sort of confused about what they should be doing.
And yet, at the same time, there are also reports that one of the fathers who reported that his 19-year-old son was trying to travel to Syria initially faced suspension from his job as a result. So it's a very confused strategy.
I think this particular instance of the father who works for the Ministry of Defence, he hasn't actually, I don't think he's been actually suspended or anything like that.
No,
but there is, there was some area of sensitivity around him in his role, looking at having his security clearance reviewed, because he had access to names and addresses of military personnel. But luckily, he wasn't suspended, but it is sad and really unfortunate that he had to go through that in the first place, because we wouldn't have known if he hadn't reported his son missing. And I think that there is a huge confusion throughout our society, and which is why a civic society response is even more important than I've talked about in the past.
But what kind of civic society response? Because some say, well, actually, we've got the wrong people trying to talk to those who are being radicalised. It should be their peers, it should be younger people. How do you even go about that, though?
Well, the 2 things. First of all, who's talking to people who've been radicalised? People who've been radicalised in the past, and the ones that have come out of that particular groupthink and that ideology are, in my experience of the last 10 years, the ones that have the best results. But let's try and work, and I talked about half the strategy. Let's try and get to people before they've become radicalised. If we can do that, we don't need to look at who is talking to them to de-radicalise them. And this is where schools, this is where parents, this is where the civic society comes into play. We as a society know what to do if we see somebody behaving in a racist manner, we see somebody behaving in somebody supporting or glorifying fascism from Europe in the 1930s onwards, but we still don't know as a society how we should behave when it comes to Islamism. Ideology that's no different. The response has to be the same, and primary prevention has to be done at a younger age and by the whole of society.
We are in the middle, or rather quite close to the beginning, really, of an election campaign. Is this something political leaders should be talking about? We're hearing plenty about business, about wages and the standard of living. What about tackling radicalisation?
Well, we heard Theresa May, the Home Secretary, talk about this a week ago or a week and a half ago, whenever it was.
As Home Secretary, though.
As Home Secretary. But if you look at what she had to say, she wasn't actually launching a strategy. She was talking about what the next Conservative government would do if they were the next government. I think that we will see more of this. I worry that political parties don't start using this whole agenda as a football and start kicking it around and sort of start making more out of it than they should be doing. I think that political parties do need to talk about it, of course they do, but we need to just take a step back and say, okay, rather than vote winning, what are we going to do, what are they going to do in terms of really tackling this problem from an ideological perspective?
Okay, thanks very much for joining us, Sky News tonight. Thank you.
Pleasure.